Hello everyone. Today I'm going to tell you some stories about cheating. The first story, the salt-laced wind whipped Maya's hair across her face as she stood on the deck of the ferry, the turquoise waters of the Torres Strait shimmering beneath a merciless sun. Beside her, Mark, her husband of 10 years, was already engrossed in his birdwatching guide, oblivious to the raw beauty of the island unfolding before them. He'd booked this trip as a romantic escape, a chance to reconnect after a year fraught with arguments and a growing sense of distance. Maya, however, felt anything but connected. She loved Mark, she truly did, but the routine had calcified, the passion withered. He saw her, she often thought, as a carefully curated collection of accomplishments, a trophy wife to showcase at corporate dinners. He didn't see the woman beneath the silk scarves and practiced smiles, the woman who yearned for something more. The island was a stark contrast to their manicured suburban life. It was wild, untamed, a tapestry of emerald rainforest and ochre earth, woven together by ancient traditions and the vibrant pulse of Aboriginal culture. Mark, true to form, focused on ticking off bird species, while Maya found herself drawn to the stories etched onto the faces of the islanders, their deep connection to the land resonating within her. She met Jeddah at the local market, a man with eyes the color of the storm clouds that gathered over the island during the wet season. He was carving intricate designs onto didgeridoos, his large hands moving with a grace that belied their strength. He spoke of the dreamtime, of the spirits that inhabited the land, of the enduring power of connection. Mark, when he finally deigned to join her, dismissed it as quaint native folklore. Maya, however, was captivated. Over the next few days, she found herself drawn to Jeddah. They talked for hours under the vast, star-studded sky, sharing stories, laughter, and a silent understanding that transcended language. He showed her hidden waterfalls, whispered the secrets of the ancient mangroves, and taught her to see the land not just as scenery, but as a living, breathing entity. The tension between Maya and Mark became palpable. He resented her fascination with Jeddah, seeing it as a personal affront, a rejection of his carefully constructed world. He launched into lectures about cultural appropriation and the importance of respecting boundaries. Maya, for once, didn't back down. She challenged him, confronted him with the emptiness that lay at the heart of their relationship. One evening, after a particularly bitter argument, Maya found herself wandering along the moonlit beach. Jeddah found her there, his presence a silent comfort. The air crackled with unspoken desire. He reached out, his calloused hand gently cupping her cheek. In that moment, everything she had ever known, everything she had ever believed, shattered. Later, lying beside him under the canopy of stars, the rhythmic crash of the waves a primal lullaby, she felt a sense of freedom she had never experienced before. It wasn't just about physical pleasure, though that was undeniable. It was about connection, about being seen, about finally acknowledging the yearning that had been simmering within her for so long. The inevitable reckoning came on the ferry back to the mainland. The silence between Maya and Mark was thick with unspoken accusations. Mark, fueled by a simmering rage, finally exploded, accusing her of betraying him, of humiliating him. Maya didn't deny it. She couldn't. The guilt gnawed at her, a bitter taste in her mouth. But beneath the guilt was a flicker of something else, a newfound strength, a defiant sense of self. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But I can't pretend anymore. I can't live this life. I need something real." The rest of the journey was a blur of recriminations and tears. Back in their sterile suburban home, the contrast with the vibrant life she had briefly glimpsed was unbearable. She knew she had to leave, to carve out a new path, even if it meant facing the unknown alone. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she would ever see Jeddah again. All she knew was that she could no longer live a lie. She had tasted freedom, and she could never go back. The island had awakened something within her, a primal instinct to seek out authenticity, to embrace the wildness that had been suppressed for so long. The price of that awakening, she knew, would be high. But for the first time in a long time, Maya felt truly alive. The second story. The scent of honeysuckle and regret hung heavy in the air. a cruel irony considering the fragrant bush thrived just outside Amelia's kitchen window. She stirred her tea, the rhythmic clinking of the spoon against the ceramic a jarring counterpoint to the silent storm raging within her. 10 years. 10 years she'd poured into this marriage, into building a life with David. 10 years, and it had all crumbled with a whispered phone call and a misplaced lipstick stain. It wasn't the lipstick itself, of course. It was the lie, the clumsy, panicked excuse about a random encounter at the dry cleaners. Amelia was no fool. She knew the scent of rose-tinted gloss, and the only place David frequented smelling of roses was Sheer Bliss, the salon down the street. Owned by Delilah, a woman whose perfectly sculpted eyebrows and expertly tousled waves seemed to taunt Amelia's messy bun and perpetually smudged glasses, Delilah. Just the name tasted like ash in Amelia's mouth. The truth had unraveled gradually, like a cheap sweater pulled apart thread by thread. A late night at the office that stretched into 2. A sudden aversion to hand-holding. And then, the phone call, David, his voice low and urgent, whispering promises to meet you after work, darling. Amelia had listened, frozen in place, her breath catching in her throat. The truth, ugly and undeniable, had slapped her awake. She hadn't confronted him immediately. Instead, she'd become a ghost in her own home, silently observing David, watching him navigate their life with a counterfeit smile and a hollow "I love you." The guilt gnawed at him. She could see it in the crinkle of worry lines around his eyes, the way he avoided her gaze. Finally, one rainy Tuesday, she'd laid the cards on the table. The lipstick. The phone call. The gnawing emptiness. David had denied it, at first, his face contorted with a desperate plea for her belief. But Amelia had seen through the charade. The lie crumbled, leaving behind a raw, exposed nerve of truth. He confessed. Delilah. Loneliness. A stupid mistake. He begged for forgiveness, swore it meant nothing. Amelia didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply stared, feeling the weight of 10 years, the weight of shattered trust, pressing down on her chest. Now, weeks later, she was still picking up the pieces. David had moved out, into a soulless apartment downtown. Amelia stayed, clinging to the familiar comfort of their home, a home now filled with echoes and the scent of honeysuckle, a constant reminder of the beauty that could mask a bitter truth. One day, she found herself walking towards Sheer Bliss. Not with anger, not with a thirst for confrontation, but with a strange, almost clinical curiosity. She needed to see Delilah. To understand, the salon was a whirlwind of pastel colors and the hum of hairdryers. Delilah was there, her hair impossibly perfect, her smile practiced and polished. Amelia walked up to the reception desk. "I'd like to book an appointment," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Delilah looked up, her eyes widening slightly. Amelia saw a flicker of recognition, a fleeting moment of discomfort before the professional veneer snapped back into place. "Certainly, ma'am. For what service?" "A complete makeover," Amelia said, meeting Delilah's gaze. "I'm tired of looking the same." The next few hours were a blur. The stylist, not Delilah, worked on Amelia's hair, snipping and shaping, adding subtle highlights. Amelia closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the hair dryer soothe her. She thought about David, about Delilah, about the life she thought she knew. When it was over, she looked in the mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger, but a surprisingly familiar one. The hard edges had softened, the sadness diluted. She was still Amelia, but a version reborn, stronger, wiser, and perhaps, a little reckless. As she paid, Delilah approached her. "You look beautiful," she said, her voice sincere. "It really suits you." Amelia met her gaze. "Thank you," she said, her voice cool and even. "I realized I was worth more than being someone's second choice." She turned and walked out of the salon, leaving Delilah standing speechless. The honeysuckle scent followed her, no longer a reminder of regret, but a promise of something new, something beautiful, something entirely her own. The storm inside had finally subsided, leaving behind a quiet, determined calm. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Amelia felt a flicker of hope, a fragile bud pushing through the cracked earth of her broken heart. She was starting over, and this time, she was choosing herself. The third story. The humid air hung thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket woven with the scent of cedar and sweat. Inside the sauna, the wooden benches gleamed with a glistening sheen. Amelia adjusted the towel wrapped around her, the heat prickling her skin. She should feel relaxed, purged of stress. Instead, a knot of guilt tightened in her chest, mirroring the heavy air around her. She and Mark had been coming to this spa for years. It was their ritual, a weekly escape from the chaos of their lives, demanding careers, a mortgage, the relentless pull of everyday responsibilities. But this week, the ritual was tainted. Liam, the new fitness instructor, was the reason. Younger, impossibly sculpted, with eyes that held a disconcerting intensity, Liam had flirted with Amelia from the moment she'd stepped into the weight room. She'd tried to dismiss it, laugh it off as friendly banter. But his attention had been a spark in the dry tinder of her discontent. Their marriage wasn't bad, not objectively. Mark was a good man, reliable, loving in his own quiet way. But the spark had flickered out long ago, replaced by a comfortable, predictable warmth. Mark saw her as a partner, a teammate, the mother of his future children. He didn't see her as a woman anymore, vibrant and desirable. Liam had seen her. He had looked at her with an undisguised hunger that she hadn't felt in years. And she, starved for that attention, had succumbed. After her workout, he'd cornered her in the empty studio, the air thick with unspoken desire. One thing led to another, and before she could fully process the ramifications, she was kissing him, his hands tracing the curves she thought Mark had long forgotten. It had been brief, impulsive, fueled by heat and a desperate yearning. But it had happened. Now, the steam seemed to press down on her, a physical manifestation of her transgression. Shame burned her throat. She kept replaying the moment in her mind, the feeling of Liam's lips on hers, the heady rush of excitement. And then, the crushing weight of reality that followed. The sauna door creaked open, startling her. Mark stepped inside, his face flushed pink from the heat. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that usually brought her comfort. Tonight, it felt like a brand. "Hey," he said, settling onto the bench beside her. "Sorry I'm late. Mr. Henderson ran over on the budget meeting." Amelia forced a smile back, her guilt intensifying with each word he spoke. "No worries," she managed, her voice sounding strained even to her own ears. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the hiss of steam as Mark ladled water onto the hot stones. Then, he reached out and took her hand, his touch familiar and comforting. "You okay?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "You seem distant tonight." The words caught in her throat. How could she confess? How could she shatter the trust they had built over years? For a moment of fleeting pleasure, a desperate grab at validation, she squeezed his hand, her heart pounding against her ribs. "I'm just tired," she lied, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. He didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press. He simply pulled her closer, resting his head against her shoulder. The familiar scent of his aftershave, the warmth of his body against hers, should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like a suffocating reminder of her betrayal. As they sat there, enveloped in the humid silence of the sauna, Amelia knew that the heat wasn't just coming from the rocks. It was the burning shame, the fear of exposure, and the realization that she had a choice to make. She could bury the secret, let it eat away at her from the inside. Or she could confront it, risk everything, and hope that somehow, Mark could find it in his heart to forgive her. The decision hung heavy in the air, as thick and suffocating as the steam itself. And in that moment, Amelia knew that the hardest part wasn't the act of betrayal, but the journey to find her way back to honesty, and perhaps, back to herself. The sauna, once a place of relaxation, had become a crucible, forcing her to confront the truth, and forge a new path forward. The fourth story. The Mumbai sun beat down on Rohan, turning his sweat into a shimmering film on his forehead. He adjusted his harness, the plastic digging uncomfortably into his thighs. 96 apartments to go. 96 more windows to transform from dust-streaked grime to sparkling clarity. He glanced up at the building, a typical Sobo high-rise, all sleek glass and jutting balconies. At least the view was good. He stopped outside apartment 12B. He recognized the balcony. A riot of bougainvillea cascaded over the wrought iron, its vibrant magenta a stark contrast to the austere gray of the building. He'd cleaned these windows before. Inside, he remembered a cool, modern space, and the faint scent of sandalwood. And a woman. A beautiful woman, her name was Priya. Rohan anchored his rope and began his descent. As he lowered himself, he caught a glimpse of her through the sheer curtains. She was wearing a silk robe, its color a pale, shimmering jade. She moved gracefully, a dancer's fluidity in her steps, and then he saw him. A man, taller than average, dark hair tousled, standing beside Priya, his arm casually draped around her waist. They were laughing, their faces close, their bodies almost touching. Rohan's stomach clenched. He squeezed his squeegee handle so hard his knuckles turned white that he forced himself to breathe, to focus on the task at hand. It was just a man. Maybe a friend. A relative. But as he lowered himself further, the scene inside unfolded with sickening clarity. The man leaned in, his lips brushing Priya's. She didn't pull away. Her hand rose, tracing the line of his jaw. Rohan felt a surge of rage, so intense it threatened to overwhelm him. He wanted to shout, to break the glass, to expose them in their blatant infidelity. But he couldn't. He was suspended, trapped, a silent voyeur in their private drama. He continued his descent, his movements mechanical, robotic. His hands moved, wiping, squeegeeing, polishing, but his mind was a maelstrom of emotions. Disbelief warred with anger, hurt with humiliation. As he neared the balcony, he risked another glance. They were gone. He imagined them in the bedroom, the jade robe discarded on the floor, their bodies entwined. The image burned itself into his memory, a searing brand that would forever mark his soul. He finished the windows, each swipe of the squeegee a violent act of suppressed rage. He wanted to scream, but all that came out was a choked sob that caught in his throat. When he reached the ground, he unclipped his harness, his hands trembling. He walked away from the building, the sun suddenly feeling oppressive, the air thick and suffocating. He didn't know what to do, where to go. He just knew he couldn't stay. Days turned into weeks. Rohan tried to forget, to bury the image of Priya with another man deep inside. He avoided that building, that street, that part of the city. He threw himself into his work, cleaning window after window, hoping to wash away the stain of betrayal. One day, he received a call. It was his manager, assigning him a new route. Rohan listened, his heart sinking as he heard the address. It was the same building. The same apartment. 12B. He considered refusing, quitting his job altogether. But something held him back. Curiosity? A morbid fascination? Or perhaps, a desperate need for closure. He arrived at the building, his hands clammy, his heart pounding in his chest. He anchored his rope, took a deep breath, and began his descent. As he approached apartment 12B, he saw Priya on the balcony. She was alone, watering the bougainvillea. She looked pale, drawn, her eyes shadowed with a sadness he had never seen before. He lowered himself until he was level with the balcony. She looked up, startled. Recognition dawned in her eyes. Rohan, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He remained silent, his gaze fixed on her. I need to explain, she said, her voice shaking. He waited, forcing himself to remain calm. My husband died, she said, tears welling up in her eyes. He was ill. And I was, lonely. Scared. Rohan looked at her, his anger slowly dissipating, replaced by a profound sense of pity. He saw the pain in her eyes, the grief that had consumed her. The man you saw, she continued, her voice cracking. He was an old friend. He was just comforting me. Rohan looked at the flowers, the vibrant magenta clashing with the somber mood. He realized he'd seen only a fragment of a story, a distorted image that had fueled his rage and his pain. He had judged her, condemned her, without knowing the truth. He nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. He didn't forgive her, not yet. But he understood. He finished cleaning the windows, a silent, unspoken truce between them. As he ascended, he looked back at Priya. She was still standing on the balcony, watching him, her face etched with sorrow. He didn't know what the future held, whether they would ever speak again. But he knew one thing for sure. The image of her with another man, the burning brand of betrayal, had finally begun to fade. Replaced by a glimmer of something else. Compassion. Perhaps even forgiveness.